Basically, the only self-balancing product before Onewheel was Segway. I think there's like a Paul Graham essay about what Segway should be. It's like, it should be like a board. When you see people, they should like give you a thumbs up, you know, not like the middle finger. I think we kind of ended up building that.
This is Kyle Doerksen, and he is the founder and CEO of Future Motion, which is the creator of Onewheel. Do you want to just start off with like, what is Onewheel?
So Onewheel is basically a skateboard with one giant wheel with a motor inside it in the middle and an active control system to balance you. So you just lean forward to go, lean back to slow down, lean heel side, toe side to turn like a snowboard.
Yeah, I was on it for, I think it was like 20 minutes just before this started, and it was a whole lot of fun.
It's so fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. How did you like come up with the idea in the first place?
So I spent, my time growing up in Canada snowboarding, and so that was like a major inspiration in terms of what it should feel like. Snowboarding on powder to me is just this kind of three-dimensional feeling, right? Because the board's free to move in a number of different directions. And then I studied, mechanical engineering and computer science and some other things, and then worked as a product design consultant for a company in the Bay Area. And we designed all kinds of crazy products for different companies, from kids' toys to medical devices that would get implanted inside people's bodies to like, you name it, right? So anything is possible. But so part of the way through that journey, I was, just looking for a tinkering project. And I was like, I took one class in control systems in college, and it was actually kind of funny. I don't know if they still do this way. I went to Stanford, but your control system, your budget for the sensor, the actuator, and the controller, I think was $20. So you had to make something really crappy. And that was the point, right? That you could learn how to control things without, very good sensors, very good actuators and stuff like that. But it left me a little bit wanting to like dive back in and do more control system stuff. So tried to build like a basic controller that could stabilize a single wheel. And it took about a year of nights and weekends tinkering.
Was this like 2012-ish?
No, this is actually like 2008. Yeah. So, early Arduino actually had a chain drive motor because the hub motors didn't really exist yet. Lithium batteries barely existed. So I was still using lead acid batteries back in that era. But I got the first one going eventually and rode it around my neighborhood and was like, okay, this is pretty fun. And I put it back on the shelf because the technology wasn't here yet to, achieve the experience that I had in my imagination, right? I was like, no, it needs to be lighter. It needs to be more powerful, smoother, and all that stuff. And then fast forward a few more years, I helped spin out an electric bicycle company, actually, called Faraday Bikes. And, got a sense to like, wow, these small vehicles are going to have a big impact on the world, right? But also, e-bikes are going to be a very competitive category. Like, what's the sort of blue ocean where I can do something that if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And so, around 2013, I took that prototype off the shelf, built the next generation of prototypes with hub motors, with lithium batteries, and launched it on Kickstarter. And, I had no idea whether anybody cared about this thing, right?
You just like put this out into the world and hope for the best.
Yeah, I just put it out in the world. In the consulting work I was doing, we did a lot of user research and need finding and, collecting the data and understanding where the white space is. This was just like, I didn't do any of that. I was just like, I built this thing. It's
like
cool.
A passion project.
Yeah, it's a passion project. In the early days, it was not commercial at all. I was just tinkering on it, right? But I had a buddy of mine who was like, will you build one for me? And I was like, you don't want this weird contraption with like wires hanging at the bottom. You want like an actual product that will do the thing. And so, I launched it on crowdfunding and, then successfully funded in a few days. And then it was time to figure out how to make these things and get them in the world.
Yeah, I know that like there's been very few like massively successful crowdfunding stories. Like there's not a whole lot because it's just like by the time you're raising money, it's a completely, you may not even have the product yet. And I think this is kind of like that case where you like haven't figured out manufacturing and all this stuff.
Totally.
How did you think about that going and setting that up?
That's a great question. So, I'd been involved with this bike spin out and we actually had done crowdfunding for that too. And, it was successful, but not that successful. And we didn't really have a good plan in place for like what we were going to do after the campaign. And so with Onewheel, I had a few tricks up our sleeves in terms of how to get it launch with good momentum. And then really a plan for like, okay, as soon as the crowdfunding, like even before it's done, we need to get going on the next stage. And for us, that involved raising a small seed round after that, and then hiring the first couple people, and linking up with manufacturing partners, and diving into the last kind of productionization engineering and everything. And we tried to do that really fast. So we went from a Kickstarter in January to I think we started shipping in September. And from like prototypes with wires hanging out to like under customers' feet in 9 months. I think that was pretty solid.
Do you have pictures of that like first prototype with all the wires, and then also the first thing that you shipped?
Yeah. Okay. We have them sitting over here in a little museum.
We'll throw those up.
Yeah, we can take a look at those. But yeah, I mean, the first prototypes were crude, but you can definitely see the family resemblance, kind of as it went.
Yeah. How did you decide, like, at what point, you are writing this in 2008 and you're like, this is clearly not the experience that you can like ship to customers? What mental model went through your head on how to figure out what like initial prototype you were willing to ship?
Yeah, I don't think I exactly knew in 2008. I think it was kind of going through the whole e-bike experience, and that's where really I got to use some of the knowledge I already had about the supply chain, and what existed and what didn't exist from those early Onewheel prototypes, but also kind of get access to cutting edge lithium ion batteries and in-hub motors, and also the cost curve on the sensors. So, 2008 to get a single axis gyro sensor, was $90, something like that. And then, in the intervening few years, it was like the Nintendo Wii, and then the iPhone was really the truly high volume application of 6 degree of freedom sensors, which of course then led to drones and all these other things. But that drove the cost curve down to, within a couple of years, you get a 6 degree of freedom IMU chip for $3-4.
So it went from like extremely expensive sensors and extremely like dysfunctional batteries to like both of those work.
Yeah, both work. Or we're maybe not like totally commoditized by the time that I started commercializing it, but it was within sight. So like our first couple generations of products, actually we used A123 batteries, which were this MIT spin out, very high power lithium iron phosphate batteries. Like nobody had them, right? We were one of the only customers outside of probably like military and medical. But yeah, we shipped our first, tens of thousands of units using these batteries, which were really cool. That company actually, didn't really make it. But we used crazy motor technologies in our first generation commercial product. Because I think one of the challenges when you're a young company is, if you try to partner with really big companies as suppliers, it goes poorly, right? Like you're the, whatever it is, the flea on the elephant's back or something. Like they roll over and get squished, right? So
it doesn't really make sense for them to spend a lot of time working with you.
Yeah, so you need to find these kind of smaller suppliers and partners. And so we found this small motor company that, had sort of developed an e-bike motor, but then that didn't work out for one reason or another, but they had the IP. And so they made us a custom first generation Onewheel motor, with like an MOQ of, a couple hundred, right? Which none of the big motor guys were going to, even pick up the phone back in that era. So we used a transverse flux motor, which like we're probably the only consumer product to ever use like this very exotic motor technology. And it was expensive and it was, hard to work with and stuff like that. But, we really chose that because, we found the right partner.
It would get the job done.
Yeah, it would get the job done, and these guys would pick up the phone, right? There's a lot of just kind of pragmatism in starting an early stage startup, right?
So how many like different suppliers or potential, motor suppliers did you go through before you found that person?
We talked to a lot, and all over the world, right? And I think that was one of the interesting things about the early gen because, if you want something that's in the catalog already, great, there's some suppliers. But if you want something different, well, that takes you very quickly into this world of like defense and aerospace suppliers and stuff like that, where they can do it, but the cost, quickly gets extra zeros added on to the back, right? And so it was really this challenge of, how do we find like cost structure that works, and also, quality and flexibility to build something new, And so it was really an interesting exercise in, talking to different companies telling us about the thing. You're like, oh yeah, we're going to build this self-balancing skateboard. Like, what are you talking about? Like, the senior person in the room's like rolling their eyes, right? They're like, we should.
Did you bring an early iteration of it to those meetings or no?
Yeah, some of them totally. But it's like, you have no volume, you have no track record, right? Why are they going to take you seriously? And I think another thing that's kind of interesting is, it's like, how do you learn the lessons of what doesn't work? And so they're, famous. Basically, the only self-balancing product before Onewheel was Segway. And after Onewheel, there's some other products, right? Like the hoverboards and whatever. But Segway was this like case study example. There's, books written about it, right? How they launched and they said, hey, we're going to change the entire world. And this is going to be such a huge, and high volume product that we should, invest in building whole factories to build, the gearbox and stuff like that. And so, they invested, tens of millions plus, right, in standing that all up before they realized like the consumer demand wasn't really there to do what they wanted. You know what I mean? So like technologically, those early Segways are kind of amazing, especially when you think that they used like 1998 technology to do it. But obviously they totally missed the market in terms of, what the stuff should be. And there's actually, I think there's like a Paul Graham essay about how like what Segway should be. It's like, should be like a board. And you should like, when you see people, they should like give you a thumbs up, not like the middle finger. And so I think we kind of ended up building that, honestly.
Build the thing that Paul Graham always wanted. Yeah. Didn't go through YC.
Didn't go through YC. I interviewed for YC once.
Really?
Didn't get in. Interviewed with PG. Yeah.
Wait, was this after the essay was published?
Yeah. They were, Y Combinator backed, I think Boosted Boards, which was an electric skateboard startup, and
like Pebble, the watch company.
Of course, they funded a lot of hardware companies, but within this sort of, mobility space, and then Trevor Blackwell, who was one of the other early partners there, was interested in balancing vehicles and that kind of stuff. So, there was enough synergy there to at least get an interview, but didn't end up in the class.
Do you know why they didn't back you?
I think it was just, they're like everybody. They're like, well, how big is this market? Right? And I think that is an interesting thing when you're doing a product like this. I mean, the TAM is zero until you start building it, right? It's market creation. So if you can, show people what it's like, visually, give experientially, like, you got to experience, like, then you start building this thing, and it's like, oh, maybe I should get one of those. And then you see someone riding around because it's a product that people use, out in the real world, has their logo on the side, right? People
kind of
see
start
it,
selling
like, what
itself.
is that? I mean, certainly in those early days, you'd go riding by and people would be like, what is that thing? Right. So it had that kind of, viral effect early on. But yeah, I think, market creation is not easy and there is no real playbook, and it's not necessarily that investable. I think that's the thing, right? So we took a pretty capital constrained approach to building it. We did raise, some outside funding, but we didn't just, create a huge pitch and raise, a series of giant rounds that then set the goalposts, like very far
to
out
a
there.
point where you literally could not meet the expectations, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And, I kind of studied what was going on with hardware startups at the time and shifted a little bit, but there were a lot of really high profile flameouts, I mean, this is like 2014, 2015, right? I'm raising, our Series A round. I go to Sandhill Road. I'm talking to people. They're like, oh man, you should have been here yesterday. We had these guys that were making this thing called Juicero. It's incredible. It makes fresh juice. I'm like, okay, I don't know. I'm not making that, but I think in many ways, like the venture capital community has there's like a flavor of the month, and that kind of, they were like, if it's hardware, there has to be a consumable, like it has to be razors and blades type model. Like if it's not that, like get out of my office, right? That's what they were doing in 2014 and 2015. And of course, Juicero raised
like 100 was it 40 or 14 million?
Yeah, I don't know. Between 100 and 200 million, it didn't last very long. People found out you could just squeeze the juice out of the pack on your own.
It was very strange.
A fancy machine.
I don't know how that ever got funded, because it was literally just a pack of juice that you squoze.
Yeah.
And then it would just give you the juice.
I guess so. But
crazy.
Yeah. And, smart people, that hardware, if you've ever looked at a Juicero, hardware is really nicely done, but just the combination of, the funding, the business model, like the expectations, obviously they can make that work. And, I mean, I guess most startups fail, right? But like even more hardware startups fail, right? Because there's just so many things you have to triangulate and nail, and there's like no margin for error. That I think you can survive more different mistakes as a software startup, but hardware is pretty unforgiving.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the actual, you do the Kickstarter, and how many like thousands of customers did you get off of that? How many people?
Yeah, I think we got like 400 or 500 orders during the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And then, we opened pre-orders right after that, and we had kind of that many more. And so that was like, okay, we got to build, 1,000 of these things basically.
Yeah. So did you run into any situation? I know when like Tesla and Elon started doing reservations for the Roadster back in like way early 2008-ish, they basically ran into the situation where they pre-sold, cars at like $125,000, and then the cost after adding up, after doing all this stuff, it was like 170 or something, 150. Did you have any situation like that?
Well, fortunately we didn't. I mean, I think all the EV startups do that exact same playbook, right? Where whatever the car sells for, they have negative gross margins at the beginning, right? So I believe, Rivian, Lucid, beautiful cars and trucks, probably awesome companies. I believe they're still, negative on unit economics, which is pretty crazy. And they're like many years in, right? And, a lot of kind of smaller scale consumer hardware startups took the same approach, but, I really felt like you have to at least break even, on even that first batch. And then you got to, start working on how do you improve your cost of goods. How do you improve? I think another big thing is just like cash flow and trade terms, right? Because unlike software, there is cost of goods, right? If you have a box of parts sitting there, that's your money that's tied up until you can turn those parts into a thing and sell those to people. And so that kind of figuring out that part of the business, which I had never done before. I was an engineer, product guy, but okay, cash flow, like enough people kind of use that terminology within the same month while I was getting things going. I'm like, okay, cash flow, we should figure out how to optimize that, right?
Cash flow, that is the thing that I should probably have.
And so one of the things that led us to was actually domestic manufacturing. So I think we've made a number of kind of contrarian bets, I would say, not raising that much capital, building one-wheeled skateboards in the first place, but then to build them domestically was also, like, I would say very contrarian in 2014.
I think the default state of things is you basically go to China at that point in time.
Absolutely. Now it's like, much more colorful conversation with people have different opinions, and still the default case is to go build in China. But, we decided to build in the US originally with a contract manufacturer. So for the first 4 or 5 years, we worked with a domestic contract manufacturer. And, one of the big things was just cash flow, that we would, get the order from a customer, our CM would build it, we'd ship it, and then they'd send us an invoice that we needed to pay 30 days later. That's very different than if you're, buying a container loads from overseas as a hardware startup, right? I mean, how much does a container load of your product cost, right? Like you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars at least. And then it's, it takes them a month or two to build it. It takes another month to get here. Then you got to sell it to somebody. So you're tying up all that cash. And so I think that's one of my number one piece of advice to, like, especially consumer hardware startups, but any hardware startups, like, figure that out.
Why did you make that call, back when you were just starting? Like, if the default state of things was go to China, what was running through your mind to say, no, we should actually just build it here?
Yeah, I think it was just, there were a handful of things. And, with the e-bike company that I'd done, we were manufacturing that overseas. And, kind of got trapped in this cash flow cycle where you needed to place bigger orders.
You're basically growing into death.
But you couldn't have, exactly. The bigger you get, you're, throwing a few Benjamins in the box with every shipment, right? And you can't really do that. Or you can do it for a very short period of time, maybe. But you look, I mean, even Juicero, like that we're kind of joking about, like, I'm pretty sure they sold that thing at a loss, right? And that's how you burn through, $100 million bucks,
yeah.
right? And so I think for hardware startups, they need to get to break even. They need to get to some like minimum level of unit profitability. Otherwise, like you say, you sell more and you just have a bigger hole, right? But for us, domestic manufacturing was, I mean, that was one consideration in that, but intellectual property was another big one, right? Nobody knew how to build Onewheels in the world because we came up with the form factor. So if we were, we needed to learn those lessons, why teach someone else how to do that? Why not retain those lessons ourselves? And then the quality, of course, because the product has to work, right? It's either balancing you or it's not. And if it's not, that's going to go poorly. So it really needs to work. Is sort of a critical electromechanical system, right? You don't want to find out after you have, container loads in the warehouse that they forgot to plug in this one connector or something, right? That's not going to work with this kind of thing. And then to have, the products physically somewhat big. So to, have the finished goods, here in the States, they can go directly to a customer, on a truck instead of, flying here or on a boat for a long time. That was a huge advantage. And then about 5 years in, we actually insourced the manufacturing. So
That would have been like 2018-ish.
Yeah, exactly. 2018, 2019. 2019 is when we came out with our Onewheel Pint, which is the first lower cost Onewheel, like under $1,000 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another moment where like, okay, do we take this to Asia now? People kept saying like, oh yeah, let us know when you're going to bring this to, transition your manufacturing to China, because that's what everybody does. And we're like, yeah, I'm not too sure about that, but spend a bunch of time in China and other countries, costing it out and seeing like, is it actually advantageous to do this? And
were you like meeting with manufacturers and trying to figure that out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Met with a lot of contract manufacturers over there, and got costed quotes and stuff like that. But ultimately decided like at that point, it was maybe slightly cheaper to build there, but the full life cycle costs, including getting it here, and then if you have any rework or like sending it back there is basically never going to happen, so that's going to be scrap, right? We decided it made more sense to like vertically integrate basically, and get the cost efficiencies from that rather than from offshoring. So yeah, definitely, there were not that many people in, with that mindset at that time. And still now, I mean, there's almost nobody building, bikes, scooters, motorcycles, whatever in the US. There's still the few domestic manufacturers there are still basically looking to offshore. Yeah. and are currently. So it's pretty cool to be, swimming upstream against that. And then now to see, this sort of reawakening of people like, hey, we need to build things here for a lot of reasons. And one of the ones for me was like, okay, so you create a few engineering jobs, marketing jobs, you create a lot more manufacturing jobs if you have a hardware startup. And so why not create those jobs here? To me, it was kind of a no-brainer. So so we're talking today in our headquarters in Santa Cruz. Our manufacturing logistics is in San Jose, California. Mm-hmm. And a lot of stuff gets made in the Bay Area. I know like there's a reputation for not, but obviously Tesla's first factory was there, right? And they still make, most of their cars for the US market, right?
Yeah. Isn't it Fremont?
Yeah, in Fremont, yeah. Right? And there's a lot of, semiconductor and tech related manufacturing, still in the, maybe not like, not leading edge semiconductor nodes, but integrating those things into systems and servers and all that kind of stuff. There's actually a lot going on in the South Bay. In that era, there was also like LiDAR and, all these other kind of complex electromechanical things getting built in that area. Tons of robotics, intuitive surgical, there are like technicians that know how to build, electromechanical products, right? There are suppliers that serve that industry. It's not quite Shenzhen, but there are a lot of, component suppliers, piece part suppliers, integrators, automation firms, stuff like that, in the Bay Area. And so it's pretty, it's like, oh, it's 4:00 on Friday afternoon and we need a oscilloscope. Like there's somebody that will like sell you one of those around the corner, right? So it's a pretty unique place to build products too.
Yeah. For your like initial first few iterations, how were you like testing the board itself? Were you just like going out to the parking lot and just hopping on it? Or what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, in the design stage, yeah, we're doing a lot of parking lot rides and, having, originally it was just us. And then we had to get, some test riders that were like, more highly skilled, shall we say. And yeah, just testing a lot of different scenarios, right? And then as it's gone on, we've built more automated testing and stuff like that. But even to this day, like every single Onewheel we make, we have a test rider in our factory, like go take it for a lap and make sure it's all working just right. So
yeah. What was the biggest like issues from the prototyping stage? What went wrong while you, especially during that first few months before you shipped the first 500 or 1,000?
I think the main thing was really, kind of envelope expansion, right? So, the early prototypes, if you watch our launch video or whatever, we're riding around the neighborhood. It's flat, it's paved, it's slow, but we knew people were going to, as soon as they got it, they would ride up a steep hill. Like the guy we gave sold serial number 1 to, he rode up Lombard Street the day he got it, so pre-launch, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure we've got uphill, downhill performance, like make sure that the vibration of riding off-road doesn't couple into the sensors and do something weird. So, and then we have over-the-air firmware updates, right? So we had it, pretty constrained in terms of top speed and stuff at the initial, launch. But then a few months later, we were able to like increase that top speed, and that really unlocked like a lot more of what people could do. And we've done that many times now over the years, right? And so that's a lot of what the testing is. Like the easy stuff is easy, but it's the people that are going to push it. Okay, now they're going to ride a berm, right? There's going to be a significant roll angle. Like your gyros aren't going to measure the right orientation. You got to compensate everything. So figuring out how to enable all that, knowing that we're trying to create a sport, right? So people are going to push it. That's what's taking a lot of the testing for sure. Yeah,
and on the whole sports side, like I know you said that there's an entire like competition every year now, and that's why we have a massive hammer next to us. Is I guess that's the trophy for winning. How did you come up with that? What is it?
Yeah, so we've had one-wheel racing for a long time, and the culmination, like the Super Bowl of one-wheel racing, basically, is called Race to the Rail. And the first one-wheel racing we did, there used to be an event called the GoPro Mountain Games out in Colorado, and the first time we exhibited there, we just got some caution tape and we set up a little zone with some cones, and we had a couple of our guys ride around. And like people came to watch, because people are like kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding and doing other kinds of competitions and mountain biking and stuff. But as soon as people were racing, that there's an audience, right? And so we built it a little bit bigger there the next year, and then a little bit bigger the next year. And then they were like, you guys need to go get your own event. Like, this is too much. They started putting up like no one-wheeling signs around the event because it was just like,
you've made it once they start putting up signs saying, don't do it here.
It was totally out of control. I mean, there were like hundreds of one-wheels out there. It was in Vail, Colorado. It was awesome. They're like, okay, this is kind of going somewhere. So, we started producing standalone events for the Race to the Rail, and then that's kind of led into now there's community organized events all over the country and all over the world, actually, where people race, and some of those are qualifying events for the Race for the Rail. And then the tradition is every year we make a trophy out of a rail, which is the side of the one wheel. So this one's Thor's hammer, but we've got swords and nunchucks and different things over the years, and that goes to the top men and women riders.
How do you think about marketing? Because I imagine, I mentioned earlier that this is a little bit like the Red Bull stuff, where you're kind of like selling an idea or a vision for, this is the type of person that drinks or uses our product. Yeah. And this is the lifestyle of someone that would use a one-wheel. How did you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, if you look at board sports, right, you look at, surf, snowboard, skate, like they all have this kind of, there's a competitive side. There's like a professional. There are professional surfers. There are professional snowboarders, right? But they are by and large participant sports, right? And so it's this kind of thing where the pros kind of define what it is and like the leading edge of what's possible, the most progressive riding and stuff like that, and they attract attention to it. But most people just want to go have fun, right? And so but I think in making it a sport, there's just a natural, like, people want to challenge themselves, right? They see a little jump. If they can land that, they want to try the bigger jump, right? They try an easy off-road trail. They think, oh, I'd love to try something a little more technical, right? And so that kind of progression, I've always thought, like, what is or is not a sport? Like, you think about electric scooters, like, do you think of anyone as like, oh, that person's a really good electric scooter rider? I don't.
Not really.
Yeah.
It's
just like they're utilitarian. They're for riding around town. But with Onewheel, like, some people, we have a team of pro riders that work for us. They are amazing. Like, you see them just jump on it and you're like, wow, they're just so effortless. They can hit crazy jumps and land every time. They can ride, unbelievable terrain. Can everybody do that? No. But they set the bar, up here, and they keep pushing on like what's possible. And then, they bring the feedback to us that shapes, our product roadmap, right? To keep building it out. So, but I think it's one of the challenges of, building a company like this, because you want it to be aspirational, but you also want it to be approachable, right? So we have, our entry level products start at $750 for the pint, and they go up to the GTS Series XL, $3,500. It goes, 30 miles an hour. It can take you on crazy mountain trails. Like, it's amazing.
All-terrain vehicle.
It's all terrain, right? But we have a broad range of customers, right? Some of them are never going to get on a trail. They're just going to ride around their neighborhood. That's totally fine. They're going to have a great time too.
Yeah. I also know, before we started this, I was out there riding it, and Jack was basically showing me the entire app and everything.
Yeah.
I imagine there's like a lot of Onewheel customers that just want to basically get on the board and ride, to the coffee shop or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's people that are much more interested in, like, adjusting the tilt of the board and all these other things. How did you decide to basically design kind of a super intuitive experience for those people that don't really want a whole lot of manual controls, while also enabling people that do?
Yeah, that's an important question, because you got some people that really want to noodle on everything, right? And you've got other people that are like, I just want it to work, right? And I mean, for lack of a better term, they're the iPhone people and the Android people, right? The iPhone people just want to pull it out of the box and it works. And the Android people, like, they got to
want to mess with it,
compile their own kernel or whatever, right? So, I think so we make it out of the box. It works great. And, in the app, you can select between some sort of pre-built, we call it digital shaping settings. But then over the years, we've added a lot more ability to actually customize the control system. So if you click the little customize button in there, you now have all these different sliders that control different amounts of the angle, forward and back, how much it compensates side to side, like the responsiveness in terms of how it accelerates and the braking performance and all this stuff. And also, as the systems get more powerful, right? Like with our high-end boards, like, you probably don't want it running all at max, because that's gonna be uncomfortable, right? So but that's like, way too much flexibility for the casual rider, and they're on our Instagram being like, what settings should I use, and then some people are just exploring the perfect blend out there in the high end. So but you can always just set the sliders all back to the middle, and rides pretty well.
On the like iteration side, I love this like line of all the different the first like 10 different iterations of the product. How did you kind of go through that iteration process all the way from the very beginning board to what like you have at the end of it?
Yeah. Well, in the very beginning boards, those are the early prototypes that I built, in my garage. And that was, chain drive, lead acid batteries, Arduino. There's no waterproofing. There's none of that stuff. But it's kind of like, you have to get it going to understand what you need to improve, right? And then you start improving things. So, some of those early ones, not that early, but the next generation had like internally geared motors. And, that kind of revealed that you don't want an internally geared motor, because there's backlash. So when you change direction, it's like, and there's noise and there's reliability, challenges and stuff like that. It's like, okay, we want a direct drive hub motor. Batteries, obviously, you want them smaller and lighter and more powerful. So that's pretty obvious. But then just things like the foot pads, so our first couple generations of products had flat foot pads.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, skateboards all have kind of concave surface.
Why is that?
Foot pads. Because it gives you more control and it keeps you sort of like more actively, like your feet are flexed. And so you're sort of attached to the board lightly when you're turning and stuff like that. On a skateboard, obviously it's also, you can get some pop and do an ollie and stuff. But with Onewheel, it's to get the side to side, control and really kind of lock your feet in. So first we did single directional, curvature, and then we did compound curvature. And now, we even have optional like foot hooks that you can put on, which off-road riders want because they're riding over like really rocky terrain. And, it sucks to have a line that they could ride, but they just get bounced off the board. Right. So that's why we came out with those. And now they're doing crazy progressive things with that, hitting bigger gaps and things like that. Which is wild.
The craziest thing to me was how like intuitive it was.
Yeah.
Like you get on it and for the first probably like 30 seconds to a minute, you're a little bit shaky, but then by the second or third lap around the parking lot, you're just chilling.
Yeah.
you continually accelerate speed too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what keeps me coming back to it, right? Like I've been building these since 2008. How many years is that? A lot.
It's like and 20, what is it, 17?
Yeah, 17
like
years, right? Yeah. So, but still, when I hop on a board, it's like, oh wow, this is a magical experience. Like that has not gotten old for me, in years of doing it. And we still support, our early products, and we have spare parts and, repair services and stuff available for them. And people are still riding them, and then on up to the boards we just launched a couple months ago, which, they're super tuned up and they're way, way better. But, the core of the experience is still, the same. So, it's been really neat to build that out over the years.
On the like company side, what have been the biggest like scaling challenges from going from just a few boards to a whole lot? Like, is it okay to say like 400,000?
Yeah. So we've sold over 400,000 Onewheels so far. And yeah, I think, when we launched the Pint in 2019, that was, like I said, our first kind of lower cost board, and it's a little bit smaller too. And that definitely expanded the market and the number that we needed to make a lot. And that was also the same time that we brought it in-house. So, bringing it in-house, the neat thing was, we were in control of our destiny in terms of like how much we want to invest in building, more capacity and, automating things and things like that. So we were in a good position there. And then during COVID, there was just exponentially more demand. Like it was a super crazy time to build hardware products because demand went way up, but supply chain got insanely bad, right?
You can't deliver anything, but everyone wants it.
Yeah, exactly. And so trying to work all those challenges, that was definitely the most challenging scaling.
How did you get through that? Because I imagine like with most of this was probably not like critical, to everyone. So they probably like tried to shut you down, I assume.
So our factory, was critical. Manufacturing in general, right? After Elon complained to, various powers that be very loudly, maybe decided to leave California at that point. We stayed obviously. And, there was like a week or something actual shutdown. And then after that, kind of got going again. But still, obviously, you're trying to run a factory in a way that keeps people safe. So you're like socially distancing and stuff within the factory, and then trying to bring in the raw materials, right? Which, I think everybody's familiar with the story now, but particularly, semiconductors, right? I guess they just like canceled a bunch of wafer fab, and then that rippled across the industry. And for 2 years at least, it was like very difficult to get chips. And so, we had to redesign hardware around available chips for sure. In terms of, like the main microcontrollers on our products. So I think we took what should be like one PCB and we made 10 different variants. So like, oh, if this week we can get this chip, we're going to put that in, and, had to make the firmware support, all those different things. I think a lot of companies had to play that game. and just kind of piece it together, however you could. It was really challenging. Some components I was like just hassling senior executives on LinkedIn and trying to get a meeting and trying to convince them that we were going to go out of business if they couldn't send us a reel of their battery management chips and whatever. So and then just pulling all the levers to try to make that happen. And then of course what happened too is you end up over ordering everything. You're like, just order. You tell your supply chain team, just like order everything you can possibly, like, whether they say it will come in 6 months or 1 month or 2 years, like just buy it all. And then eventually it all shows up and you have way too much, right? So then post COVID, it's kind of been, adapting back to that. And, I think that like the bike industry has really been hit hard with that exact problem, right? Going to sort of over inventory and then needing to work that back down. But the fact that we do all our final assembly here has really saved us and given us the flexibility to kind of, rather than just having like stale inventory, to keep on iterating and moving. It's like, well, our next gen products will still need tires and we have a bunch of them. So, put them in there. But if you have a bunch of finished goods like in the box, like I guess you're going to have to sell those at a discount or whatever, which is what's been happening in the bike industry and things like that. And they've really been struggling. It's
kind of interesting. I mentioned when we first got here that this is basically like the opposite of VR, where it's this new technology, but then you get it. And with VR, you use it probably 3 hours the first day, and then like 2 hours the next day. And then over the, you put it on the shelf, and then like you pick it up a week later and use it for an hour, and then it roughly just stays on the shelf then on.
Yeah.
And like there's a few people that really get into VR, but like not a huge number. With every single Onewheel that I've seen, it's just beat to shit.
Yeah.
Like people use them.
People put miles on them. Yeah, for sure.
How did you kind of, like, I imagine you probably pretty rapidly realized that people were just going to put huge amounts of miles on this stuff and really put them through the ringer.
Yeah.
How did you design the product with that in mind? That it would need to work when things were breaking.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, people have ridden, now way over 200 million miles on Onewheels, so it's a lot. And yeah, like you say, people, I think the average Onewheel has, around 1,000 miles on it.
Okay, so if the average Onewheel has like 1,000 miles on it, how much time does that equate to?
Well, I mean, it varies by model, right? But, the average speed is between 10 and 20 miles an hour. So you can kind of do the math on what that is. But yeah, I mean, from the beginning, so what you're talking about is, a lot of consumer hardware, frankly, is used on day one. It's a Christmas gift. It's whatever. You try it out because it's new and shiny. And then it goes in your drawer. I call it drawerware, right? And, I really didn't want to build that. I mean, obviously, we could have done something that was like cheaper and plastic and like would break quickly, but you could, ride around on Christmas morning or something. But
it's not the thing that you would want, though.
Yeah, no, it's not. And, I really felt like, hey, we're going to define this category. Are we going to define it as a toy, or a gadget, or are we going to try to be more of a vehicle and a sport? And for me, it was way more compelling to build a vehicle and a sport. It's also way more enduring, right? We're not trying to get like 1 or 2 good seasons and then like move on to the next thing, right? We're trying to build this so that the future involves Onewheels, right? And that Onewheels just keep getting better and, more and more people start using them. So, we've always, like the frame rails are CNC machined aluminum, and, everything is really built to take the abuse of real world riding. And then it's all repairable too, right? So, your bumper scale is scratched up, you can swap those out. We sell them in our online store, and, we also do, people can send in their boards to get fixed at our San Jose facility, or now basically buy all the parts to fix them themselves at home. So yeah, it's been a big thing, just keeping them on the road and on the trail. And I think if you look at, different kinds of, products like motorcycles or ATVs or, off-road vehicles, like you can fix them, you can keep them going. And that's really what we wanted to do.
So for the repairability aspect, does the like crowd that buys Onewheels happen to also like to be tinkerers?
Some are and some aren't. I think I think in the early adopters, for sure, yes. Right? And then as you kind of get farther through that, bell curve of different personalities of tech adoption, Yeah, a lot of people just don't want to tinker. They just want to ride,
Yeah.
right? So there's definitely both types of people in our rider base for sure.
Yeah, it's always interesting when there's a hardware company that kind of, is thoughtful about making it so their customers can actually repair their products.
Yeah.
Like that's not a normal, that's
Totally.
not a 100%
And to be
decision.
fair, I mean, we didn't like totally nail that from day one. I mean, the first, handful of years, like, a lot of people complaining like, oh, like how come I can't fix this part? And, we're like, oh, we need to send that into our facility. But we hadn't yet built the infrastructure on our end to be able to, provide those components in a way that they would plug and play and, create an ordering system and all that. But in the last couple of years, that's been a big focus. We don't really want people to, just buy another Onewheel. We want to like have them have a good experience on the product they already have. And then when they're ready for, more range or more speed or whatever, they want to hand down the one they have to their nephew because, they keep bothering them about it. Like, great. Then that's when we'll sell them the next one. But, we're definitely not into like planned obsolescence or,
you just want to make a great product to last.
Yeah. We want to support them for the long term, which is what you'd expect. Like, it's kind of weird, between vehicles and then gadgets. Gadgets, your VR headset breaks. You think you're going to fix that? Like, no, it's all glued together and impossibly small. And like, I don't think there's any way, right? But your car, like if you couldn't, get it repaired, like that'd be a terrible car. And you tell everybody like, I hate this car because, they can't fix it. So, I think it's just been that interesting, balance between, it sort of is consumer electronics in terms of like how it's built and stuff like that. But then it's also a vehicle in terms of the way that it's designed to last and, be robust. So.
Yeah. Do you think you made any decisions differently? Like because you didn't raise huge amounts of money, do you think you made any business decisions differently that are kind of like customer facing, like the customer experience and not having like subscriptions and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, another thing with VC funded hardware companies is like they often very early try to push some kind of subscription model. And I totally understand why they do. Like it looks great on your,
on paper.
On paper and on your spreadsheets, right? But I think the challenge there, I mean, the amount of customer blowback, like you see like, oh, car brands have like heated seats that they only turn on if you have the app subscription and stuff. And like people are like, that's dumb.
It's like $1,200 for heated seats.
Yeah, that are already there. Like
you
everybody
already bought
has
the car
them,
for
but you can't turn them on
$60,000.
unless you pay. Like, I just hate that. Like I've gotten pretty close to being like, maybe we should do something like that. And I'm like, no, that's just, that's dumb. Like, if like build the hardware, let the hardware do all it can do, give people free firmware updates that make it even better. Don't like lock stuff down. I don't know. That's just my philosophy. So, so I think it's been nice to not, get sucked into that. But I totally understand the temptation as, all products now or almost all are sort of connected products, right? And it opens up the possibility for, surveillance and data tracking and stuff like that. I mean, so, Onewheels don't have GPS in them, but you can record your ride using your smartphone. But that's all up to the user. Like if you're not recording it, we're not recording it either, And so, unlike modern cars and things like that, where they're always like, even
sending data
these
back to
CNC
Tesla.
machines like phone home and like ask if they can keep running or not. Right. And there's good reasons for that. Right. Like if you don't pay your lease payments, like they make it not work. Right. Which is kind of crazy.
Actually?
Yeah.
That's the way that they...
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you do a lot of stuff on manufacturing. Like if you buy like an ITAR controlled machine, if you take it to another country, they do have GPS and they will not run. Like if you move them like to another region or something like that. And it's not possible to turn them back on.
Nuts.
So the smart devices, right? It's like, okay, that, there's reasons why they chose to do it that way, but it's like, how do you maintain like the customer friendliness? Like the customer is buying this thing and they're paying money and like, so obviously there's a lot of debates, about like what the customer should be able to do and not, right? And frankly, yeah, like we've had to set the lines for some of those things, right? Like for us, a fairly controversial one is battery replacements. So, we had people replacing, the individual battery cells basically. which on a DIY basis, which is not a good idea because
Wasn't it like a battery pack?
yeah, there's a battery pack, but people like take them apart and they're like, oh, my battery isn't lasting as long. I want to swap out these cells and stuff. And that's really not like a user serviceable thing.
That's like really
right?
dangerous.
It's really dangerous. And high energy lithium batteries, right? They only work well if they're like perfectly matched to the battery management system. Like that's and so now we sell battery module replacements, which people can do themselves, and it's great because if obviously batteries don't last quite as long after they've been used hundreds of times, and so to put in a new battery pack and have that capability, but we had to say like, no, we don't support that. Like if you do that, like, we're going to make it difficult. Of course, we're going to void your warranty. We're going to like encourage people to not do that. And that's, some people are like, bah, like I want to be able to tinker everything myself. And we're like,
technically you can, but we're not going to be there if you do. Yeah.
And it's going to reflect poorly on us, when your modded battery pack burns down your house, like, don't bother us about that. And like that's happened. Right. So,
what happened when that happened?
Various structures have burned down from, modded battery packs, and, people are like, oh yeah, like we hear from their insurance companies and stuff like that. And, we've looked at a lot of, like pictures from different, fires. And often it's like, often it's not the one, like the Onewheel was there, but that wasn't the source of ignition, right? It's like just because people have a lot of different, like electric scooters, electric skateboards, a lot of this stuff that's not certified, that's not really very well engineered. Necessarily, the people that are enthusiastic about these products often have a handful of these vehicles, like charging in the corner of their, their shed or their garage or their apartment or whatever. And lithium battery safety is like a top of mind concern. I mean, we've sold, 400,000, like, and anything that can happen has happened. Right. And, we want to make sure is that, that the products are as safe as they can be. And, because, it's kind of terrifying, right? Putting that much, lithium, and, we use very high energy cells, right? Because it's a small pack and you need a lot of control authority to keep you balanced. So the cells are insanely powerful. And when they decide to give up that energy all at once, it's spectacular. So we're like, hey, if we're, we can engineer this, we can make it safe. We spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars really on testing all those packs in the factory. Mm-hmm. Like each individual pack is fully tested several times up and down in various conditions before it goes to a customer. The guy who's like soldering that in his garage, like has no idea what he's even doing. So
on like the customer feedback side, you do really care about the customers.
Yeah.
But you also are not going to do you're not even able to do every single thing that, a customer wants every single time. So how do you decide like what, when you're getting feedback, what to incorporate, what not to incorporate, and what to kind of like put on the checklist for things we want to do down the road?
I think that's one of the hardest parts, right? Because, ideally you could, like address every issue right now retroactively and, just, be perfect in every way. But if you look at customer support, right, you have 97% of people are having a great time, right? 3% of people are really loud and telling you that, the sky is falling and, you're a terrible company and they're going to ruin you on social media and whatever, right? And, I think it's kind of hard to collect data from those like really loud, people that have an axe to grind, right? And so, we do, like owner surveys and stuff like that on a regular basis that just, gets feedback from everyone. And I would say we rely a lot more on that for our kind of product road mapping. And some of the stuff, it's like, we realize like it's been, 3 years that this thing has been on our list, and like finally we can, deploy it. Selling replacement batteries, like that had been on the list for years, and finally we were able to do it. We have it for all of our models now. And it's easy enough for people to do, or they can send their board in and, we'll do it for them. And we've really enhanced like turnaround times and stuff like that, to make that possible. So, it's challenging, but we're doing the best we can.
For you as a leader, I know over time as the company changes and evolves, you kind of have to decide, change where you're focusing your time. What have been the biggest things where you just get to kind of, like, I think for Jim Bolosic, he mentioned that he really loves driving forklifts, and he says that he gets to drive forklifts less now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. How have you kind I evolved as a leader over time?
I've never driven a forklift, actually, so far. I've always kind of wanted to do it, but I never have. So I got to add that to the list. But people that do, they seem to really like it.
Yeah.
For me, like the core of it has, like, my interest is really product, right? And it's like, how do you build great product, new experiences, make it better and better? So thankfully, I still manage to organize my days and my months to, like, focus, on that as much as possible. Obviously, it's a little bit higher level now. The first ones, like, I was soldering every wire, right? Like, writing every line of code. That hasn't been true for a long time.
How many of the first ones did you solder every wire?
None that went into production, but in the prototyping stages, definitely a lot. Like early, I remember going to, like, early trade shows, and, like, we blew up, like, the controller on one and the battery on the other, and we had two,
like, at the trade show.
Yeah, so I had to, like, swap them in the middle of the night, like, in a hotel in the UK, and next day it worked, so that was cool.
Were they concerned about, like, you flying with this thing on an airplane, or no?
Not then. They had no idea what was going on. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it would be great. Now it's a lot more difficult to fly with
random
batteries, with random stuff. But we'll see what we can do there. If you know anybody at the FAA.
Okay, so you're at, like, 400,000 plus right now. How are you going to scale to, like, millions of these things? Or is that even the way that you're thinking about the company? Or is it kind of like you have some subset of a market and you're going to be selling, like, 100,000 a year, and you're just going to do that super well? Or are you going to like expand massively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the reality of the Onewheel product line is that it's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that is intentional, shall we say. It's always been kind of our branding and stuff too. Like, it is not for everyone. It is for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. Like, should your grandma be riding a Onewheel? Probably not. Like, there's other ways she should get around. But there are enough people that we've been able to build a business of that scale, and we still have a lot of expansion left to do internationally across different price points. It's still, like, the market penetration is quite low. Like, I'm always, like, there's simultaneously a lot of Onewheels out there, but not a lot relative to, say, the number of people that snowboard or skateboard or certainly ride bikes or something like that. And so there's a lot of room there. And then, I think we're at the point now where we're also looking at, like, what else can we do with the technology we've developed. We're experts at brushless motor design, power electronics, battery management systems, and then building all that stuff at scale. And so, what else can we do with that? And so, we've got various R&D programs going on that are, looking at, what else can we do? And, we're also trying to look at whether there are ways that, we could do manufacturing partnerships with other companies, because we have figured out how to build stuff here in the States. And, that's something that's on the to-do list for a lot of other companies. And so I think we're starting to explore partnerships of that kind as well.
Have you kind of used the same facility to put everything together? Or has that, did you initially buy one early on and then kind of ramp out of it over time?
So we started with, one building. Now we have, like, 6 or 7 buildings, and, we've kind of moved around. So our sort of leading edge production ends up being in the new facility, and then the older facility ends up transitioning to doing, RMA or accessories or warehousing or stuff like that. And then we keep, because ops people love having just, like, a blank empty building and be like, oh, I know where everything is going to go and it's going to flow this way and stuff like that.
I would also think there's a little bit of fear of you just, like, buy a new building and shit just piles up in the building, and you're like, damn.
Yeah. No, you want to do
Here's your cost of goods just sitting there.
Exactly. You want to do it right the first time. So we've moved and expanded into different buildings, and really redesigned the whole manufacturing line several times. And so we've designed our own, like, basically like smart conveyors that move all the material around and saves a ton of time versus how we used to do it. And then, obviously automating more and more of the various testing and the stages of manufacturing. It's kind of an ongoing process. I would say it's like the testing is very automated, but a lot of the assembly is still not automated that we do. And obviously with various things that are happening in robotics and stuff like that, there's a lot of opportunities to automate more. So we're always exploring, new technologies and figuring out how to incorporate that in the manufacturing line, which is neat, doing it ourselves. Contract manufacturers usually don't want to make that investment, right? Because it's like, why would we invest in your efficiency? Like, we make money on you not being efficient. So there's always like misaligned incentives there, and that was kind of ultimately why we moved from contract manufacturing to in-house.
What were the biggest moments of production hell?
I mean, any new product introduction, there's always, production hell. But I would say, COVID was pretty peak, just trying to, work with what was available, which was not really what you wanted. But yeah, I think, and being in a backlog is never good, right? I think production hell, for Tesla, that was like, they already sold the cars, or at least had the deposits, right? But they couldn't build them, right? And so that's definitely the worst feeling, right? And then people are canceling their orders. You're like, oh shit, like I gotta build.
You're losing huge amounts of money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're trying to, get the supply and demand to align like as quickly as possible, because otherwise it's painful. So yeah, I would say when we do, any new model, there's been some level of that, right? Where it's like, oh, there's some piece that's late, it's behind schedule, you got to change things. You change things, it's very expensive, but you have to do that in the short term because otherwise you're gonna be stuck to this for a long time. So, I would say typically it's the new product introduction that's just like, every time it's a whirlwind ride. And, fortunately we've learned a few things, and we have, a lot of established systems and supplier relationships and stuff like that now, but there's always something. But I think that's what makes it fun too. I mean, as much as I like the, design of products, I think, figuring out how to industrialize them and scale them is, it's an interesting problem. It's an interesting challenge, right? You really have to think creatively. It's like, we couldn't just go to someone who made Onewheel manufacturing equipment. We had to design all that stuff ourselves, right?
Yeah, the supply chain didn't exist. No
Supply
one
chain
was there.
didn't exist. Yeah, so we had to design all that, and that was really interesting. And so we've got a bunch of machines that nobody else has, or has ever thought of. And yeah, there's just ongoing opportunities for improvement, right? And making that more efficient and better. So. I think it's like, it is manufacturing hell, but it's also like, that is ultimately what you're building. You're building a machine that can build machines. And I think, a lot of the founders you talk to, like, they have to kind of get off on that, because that's the task that's ahead of them.
Yeah. It's struggling with Factorio again and again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's real life Factorio.
Yeah. All right. Final question. What's the hardest thing you've overcome?
I would say, frankly, it's the 0 to 1. I think going from there's nothing like this to, okay, now here it is, and it's in the world. There's just there's uncertainty on literally every single side, right? It's like, how are we going to fund this? Who's going to buy it? How are we going to make it? How are we going to market it? Like, what is it even going to be? Like, there's so much uncertainty, and it's head spinning, right? And meanwhile, you like quit your day job and you're like, oh shit, and then like sleeping on your friend's couch. And I just have a lot of respect for anyone that goes 0 to 1, because it's pretty gnarly. All the other stuff, it's like, you have a big challenge, but you also have resources, and you have like, you have a lot to work with, right? But in those early days, you're figuring it all out. You're making your own luck, right? And I think that's definitely the most challenging.